Welcome everyone to Après, Midi with Scott Carpenter. I'm so pleased to have him here. Where are the books? Where are the books? Quick! Paris Lost and Found, French Like Moi. I'm going to let Scott talk about himself, so I'm not going to give him a formal introduction. But I want you all to know that these are the funniest two books I have ever read in my life. And I've read a lot of funny books, and there are a lot of great authors in France, but I've never laughed so hard. And poor Scott, because I was constantly sending him text messages. Oh my God, I can't believe this you said and that you said and blah, blah. I was like, okay, I'm gonna make him nuts. So I decided to stop. But I'm so glad he's here, and hopefully you'll get him to read some passages. And as I said before, do not leave home without one. You're on.
Okay. Wow. Thanks for having me. Thanks for your patience as we get everything organized. Can you hear in the back? Yeah, and I realize we've got this column here. I will try to make myself as visible as possible or annoyingly waver back and forth. Yeah, right. So I'll do what I can. Just a couple of moments ago, Adrian told me that my range is from here to here. And I thought, oh my God, I thought I had more breadth than that. And it turns out she was just talking about the camera, so that I'm supposed to stay within these limits. So
you have up till the plant.
Up until the plant.
But
okay,
but then you would hide the books.
Then I would hide the books, right? So I'll do what I can. If I wander off camera, apologies in advance. Adrian also invited me to say a few words about myself, which is great. That's my favorite topic. Just a tiny bit of background. So I am a sort of Minnesota and Paris-based writer, but I'm also a prof, soon to be retired, no more grading. So I teach at Carleton College in Minnesota. And once I got all of the academic writing out of my system, turned to creative writing many years ago now. And so I've got a novel out, I've got a collection of short stories, some oddball things here and there, and then these two Paris memoirs and another book coming. And so I'll just say a couple of words about these. The first one is French Like Moi. It came out in 2020. And it's I would say, relatively lighthearted take on what it takes to sort of build your life in Paris. It goes from like getting an apartment, doing some remodeling, getting kids into school, all of these sort of crazy, kooky, bureaucratic things that make for the pleasurable experiences that we all have in France. And then the...
Phones off, please.
The newer book is Paris Lost and Found, and it is sort of a continuation but also a bit of departure because it has to do not with building your life in Paris but with rebuilding your life in a city like Paris after suffering a loss. And so I'll say a little bit more about that as we move forward. Those are the two big projects that I have that are focused on Paris. And I would say as a writer, writing about Paris is an extraordinarily challenging thing. And I just want to say a couple of words about that before I get into the specifics of my work. It's hard because of what? It's hard because everybody thinks they already know about Paris. So I just finished judging a travel writing contest in the US. And the thing that really struck me is that if you're writing about Turku, Finland, or you're talking about like traipsing through the jungle in Indonesia, you have this immediate leg up with readers because they got no idea what you're talking about. And so it's just like this big question mark, and you get to fill that space. Paris has the opposite problem. Paris is the place that everybody knows before they even go there. Because
or
kids,
what they think they know.
What they think they know, right? So Paris is everywhere in our culture, and kids are watching it on Disney. They're looking at the Hunchback of Notre Dame. We get it like I've got a Travel Pro suitcase that has an Eiffel Tower on it. People have tote bags with the Mona Lisa. You watch Emily in Paris. You binge watch these things. It is just our culture is saturated with it. And it results in what I call the bright, shiny object problem. That Paris is this glitzy, sort of very shiny thing that is filled with stereotypes and cliches that are very powerful and very convincing, right? Paris is the city of romance. Paris as this sort of cosmopolitan place. It's high culture, it's sophistication. And then you get here and you find, yes, there's that, but then there's also other stuff, right? It's mostly the other stuff that I like to talk about.
The underbelly.
The seedy, seamy underbelly of the city of light, right? So it's more the city of darkness, I think, that really interests me. But it's a challenge because there's also some resistance to that. People really cling tightly to these stereotypes, and so it has to be a kind of a soft touch to get people to see something different. So a lot of that is what I try to do. And it turns out that when you're taking that kind of an approach, what you really have to do is tell a very personal story. So the kinds of things that make for the glitzy, shiny object of Paris, you know, the museums and the statues and the monuments and the great architecture, these are general things that are accessible to everybody. And what is not accessible to everybody immediately is the very specific personal kind of story that you can enjoy and that really makes for what I consider to be the heart of the Paris experience. So that's what I try to do. And I've got two kinds of arrows in my quiver. One is my secret weapon, which is that I live in the 13th Arrondissement. Now, if you're all in this room because of Adrian, you know something about real estate in Paris, and you probably don't know any of that real estate in the 13th, right? It's not a really well-known part of Paris. And if you look at a tourist map of Paris where they divide up, you see like the little spiraling arrondissement, you get usually like little icons that show the monumental structures. It's like, oh, the 7th, that's the arrondissement with the Eiffel Tower. The 1st, a little icon of the Louvre, things like that. When you get around to the 13th, what you see is the date the map was printed. Right? There's nothing there to see. Right? And the story is that if you find a tourist in the 13th arrondissement, the person is lost. You just need to send them in another direction. The other kind of secret weapon for this very personal storytelling is that it reflects my own individual life. And for this particular book, Paris Lost and Found, it's a reflection of a story of loss. So it has to do with the decline that my wife was undergoing as she was slowly dying from early onset Alzheimer's disease. So that is not necessarily the sort of light and frothy kind of tale that is told in the first book, and yet it's threaded through the narrative of the second one. So what I want to do, just as I introduce those two topics, this notion of the 13th arrondissement, something that is not bright and shiny, and also the personal story of loss. I'll give you a first reading, so I'll have a few readings that are sprinkled through this, and just to give you a sense of what the narrative is about. So this is just not even 2 pages, and it's from the second chapter called Memory. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that France is like the Matrix, a world of make-believe that passes itself off as the real thing. It's a grab bag of berets and baguettes and poodles and small cafe tables with checked tablecloths, long-legged women and narrow-hipped paramours. Who would want to interrupt such a great dream? Imagine that someone stomps in and invites you to choose between the red pill and the blue one. If you choose red, it tastes icky and is hard to swallow, and you won't like what you see when you wake up. Go for blue, and it'll be Disneyland forever. Yes, please. In addition to all the memories you arrive with, weighing you down like oversized suitcases, the city churns out additional memorable moments during your stay. Every street corner is photogenic. Every cobblestone triggers a sigh. And should you run short of memories of your own, tons of pre-made ones are available for purchase. By the time you return home, you find yourself overloaded with mementos, and like that stain on your shirt from the last steak frite, you can't wash them away, because the essence of this city is that it's unforgettable. As Rick tells Ilse in Casablanca, when everything else is falling apart, we'll always have Paris. Until we don't. Anne and I had been coming for decades, living here for a year at a time. Half our life was now in France. It had been glorious enough as these things go, but then a few of the tchotchkes started going missing. At first, I thought they'd just been misplaced. Anne couldn't come up with someone's name. A word danced on the tip of her tongue, refusing to make its grand entrance. Soon enough, though, there was more. The shopping list gave her trouble. She made mistakes counting out money. Words eluded her. In the neighborhood, she got so turned around that even the landmark of the great public toilet no longer helped. Her problem? It was the very thing Paris specializes in: souvenirs, memories. So I just want to pause there and comment on this notion of memory and of souvenir. So the word souvenir, of course, in French goes in two directions. On the one hand, souvenir is a memory. It's not the faculty of memory, which is la mémoire, but this notion of a specific personal experience, a recollection that we have, again, very personal and specific and individual. At the same time, the souvenir is also that object that we buy that is mass-produced. So there are hundreds or hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of these things circulating. And both of these come together in this notion of the mass reproduced experiences that happen, the collective experiences, and the little touchstones that we have for them, and then that very personal experience for which we have only the very personal touchstones that are not mass reproduced. This is the kind of line that I try to walk through the book, trying to step more in the direction of the very personal experience that is still attached, inseparable from, I think, the collective and sometimes mass reproduced experiences that we all know so well. So I try to do that while keeping, bizarrely, the tone light. It's a challenge for a writer because the story of loss that is signaled in the title of the book, right, Paris Lost and Found, can be a little heavy, right? There are parts of the book, especially the first part of the book, that can be a little heavy. And a writer typically needs to try to connect with different audiences in different ways. So not everybody wants to buckle themselves in for a long narrative of loss. They might want something else. They might want something that is, they're looking for like cleverness in writing, or they're looking for humor. We're not going to do everything, right? Not every book does everything. Yeah, so with French Like Moi, the first book, my favorite review was of how the book failed for a reader. It was, I think, was an Amazon review. They said, this book was totally worthless. It didn't help us at all during our recent trip to Paris. Spot on, right? Spot on. So I'm not trying to do that, not trying to do the guidebook, trying to do something else. But one of the ways that I have of managing all of this is to try to weave between tones, the kinds of stories that I tell and the kinds of tones that I have, for a couple of reasons. But before I go into those reasons, I want to give you a little selection, another little reading that is from the very next chapter. So it can go quickly from one side to the other. The next chapter is, again, just a couple of pages here. The next chapter is called Le Turd.
Oh, I love this story. I laughed so hard I cried. Oh, God. See, just thinking about it kills me. Okay.
Adrian, I'm going to have you removed. Oh, no. In the Midwest, if a tornado rips through town at a weird time of year, people scratch their head trying to figure out if it's an isolated incident or the start of a new trend. Just bad weather or climate change. That was the question in our apartment building in Paris the day the concierge found a human turd in the garbage area. Was it a one-off, or was this the new normal? Let me explain. Our building is an 8-story affair located on the Rue Bobillot in the 13th Arrondissement. It's a 1930s structure with a vibe of Art Deco done on the cheap. The place is low security by Parisian standards, but you do have to pass through 2 code-locked doors to make it into the hallway. That means we are rarely surprised by what we encounter on the premises. I once found a copy of Robinson Crusoe abandoned on the radiator by the stairs, and occasionally Madame Estevez, the concierge, leaves a mop in a corner. But outsiders can't easily dump leftover furniture or dead bodies here. As for defecation, the human variety has traditionally been restricted to private areas. Some years ago, there had been an issue with the canine variant, but the infamous woman of the 5th floor, La Dame du 5e, had since moved away. But then came the day I found Danielle and Madame Estevez in a heated discussion in French, and I learned that someone had taken a dump in the room where we keep the building's garbage cans. The two women were outraged. Who had ever heard of such a thing? This was beyond the pale. Are you sure it's real? I asked. They gaped at me. Madame Estevez mostly speaks Portuguese, so I figured she hadn't understood. As for Danielle, her hearing isn't what it used to be. But then they looked at each other and rolled their eyes in unison, and I could practically hear their shared thought. Stupid American. Danielle dragged me to the doorway of the garbage room, known as the local poubelle, and pointed. I conducted my inspection from a distance. It was the real McCoy, all right. Not coiled the way they make the fake ones, but long and dark with a banana-like curve to it. I'm not sure what the standard measurements are for these things, but I pegged it as an XL. What were we going to do about it? That's what Danielle wanted to know. Maybe throw it away, I suggested. After all, the garbage cans were right there. But she was more inclined toward a declaration of war. Danielle is the only member of our building committee who's retired, so even though she's not the one we elected president, everyone knows she's really in charge, rather like Dick Cheney during the Bush years. Her finger drove into the air. I shall call a meeting. I confess I hesitated to bring Anne into the loop of this little drama. After all, she had her hands full just keeping reality from floating off every day, and I figured the story of a turd appearing in the local poubelle wasn't likely to command the attention it might otherwise deserve. Boy, was I wrong. She heard me chatting with Danielle, and before I could stop myself, I'd spilled the beans. She listened without blinking, taking it all in. In the old days, she would have shrugged it off, but the new Anne was fascinated. Here was a woman who couldn't remember how she'd spent the last 15 minutes, but somehow this tale stuck. It confirmed my hunch that emotion is the mortar that cements memories into place. After learning about the turd, she'd pass by neighbors in the hallway and whisper to me, a little too loudly, "Did he do it?" No? What about that one?
Oh, God. That's not the end of that story.
That's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story, which turns into a kind of a whodunit. As we realize that we're dealing with a serial crapper, right? But it does come to a resolution. It does come to a resolution. But so what happens in the book is that I'm blending a kind of tragedy and comedy as we walk through it. And this is not just like a rhetorical device, it's because that's how we were living it, right? That what we had decided when Anne had her first received her diagnosis was that she wanted to continue living as we had, coming to Paris frequently for long stays, enjoying the kinds of small dramas that, that occur in Parisian life, and this was part of it. And so as I started the project later of writing this book, I had this in mind, that I wanted to somehow capture that, both sides of this, both the tragic and the comic, as well as the particularly sort of Parisian aspects of it, so that I would have a book that was not just about Paris, but that it would be a book that would be in some strange way like Paris. So that the experience of reading the book would be somehow similar to the experience that I have of reading the city, of being in the city, of living in the city, and trying to show how that is, how that unfolds. So what this does is it takes me down a bunch of bizarre rabbit holes, and I'll just mention briefly some of the topics that come up in the book. Aside from dealing with the stories of loss, I go into a great amount of detail about rats in the city. I've got a chapter about violence in Paris as I watch what appears to be a gunfight breaking out outside of my apartment building. which led me to taking shooting lessons in the city of Paris. Happy to talk about that. Banking and bureaucracy. These tales
Don't we know it?
I feel it too. I feel it too. Cemeteries and death in Paris. Scams. So all sorts of really wonderfully rich kinds of topics. And what I don't talk about in the book is the Eiffel Tower. I don't talk about museums. I don't talk about monuments. I don't talk about bateau mouche, Michelin-starred restaurants. None of that. Not because they're not great topics.
No wonder you got that review.
That's right. I definitely earned it. Yeah. But the fact is that those things are accessible through many different avenues, right? There are many other books for that sort of thing. And what I wanted to do is show a kind of Paris that is not immediately accessible to everyone. In fact, this specific Paris is only accessible to me, but the idea is that it helps to show people, provide examples of the kind of depth of experience that you can have in a city like this, and maybe open the door or open the mind, maybe, to having some of those experiences and enjoying them. So for me, the city really comes to life through the people. I have to say, I'm not a very good tourist in the traditional sense. I mean, I can go to a museum and there are things. I'm not a total idiot. I can absorb some things that way, but mostly what I need is interaction with the people. And that's the kind of thing that I try to show in the book as well. And these interactions have to do with long-standing friends, other kinds of connections that I make in Paris, and even just the idea of making connections in the city, which is not always easy. And I know many of you have lived in Paris for long periods of time, and maybe you've been more successful than I have been, or others. But so it's just well known that France is a slightly more, it's got a different culture of friendship than the US, right? In the US, there can be sort of easygoing, casual friendships on a regular basis. And in France, it's a little harder to do that. The social circles are really quite tight. And the joke is always that it's really hard to break into these social circles. And once you do, it's almost impossible to break out, right? You're like a prisoner for life. Mostly a happy prisoner, right? So there is that sort of thing. But there are other kinds of connections that one has. And I, for example, have, for many years now, served on the condo board in my building. Yeah. So I also serve a similar function in my building in St. Paul, and I find it an utterly tasteless, dry, unpleasant experience in almost every way imaginable. Not so in Paris.
Here it's torture.
Well, maybe a little bit of masochist in me or something. But in Paris, one of the things that it does is, first of all, it binds you together with people. And in a building in Paris, you're not under there's no expectation that you will actually know about or especially care about anybody else in the building, right? Whereas in the US, the idea is like, oh, you live next door to me, so you must be a friend of mine, I guess, right? Somehow proximity enforces this kind of friendship. Not so in Paris. I mean, in my building here, I've got an apartment. Their door is literally like 12 inches from mine. I have only ever seen the man, and I think he has a wife. Otherwise, he's holding up both sides of the conversation by himself in there sometimes. I just don't even know. I know nothing about these people. But when you serve on the condo board, then suddenly you have this little band of people who come together. We're like the Marvel heroes, right? We're kind of called when there's some great urgency. And then when there is a problem, serving on the board cracks that building open, sort of like a dollhouse or an ant farm, right? So you can actually see all of the things that are going on. And it's really quite revelatory. So these are people who show up on a regular basis in the book as well. I'm also very interested in the kinds of more anonymous encounters that one has in Paris, which is somewhat less common in the States. You get it in some of the larger cities, but not quite to the same degree, partly because of the density of human life in Paris, which is, we can talk about later. But these anonymous things means that there is a kind of spectacle, an ongoing spectacle in Paris, which I watch regularly from my living room window, so it overlooks a little square. And I get to watch the two guys who are sitting there having their third can of beer at 11 o'clock in the morning. Sure, why not? Or like the mother who's like straightening the collar on her daughter's blouse as they're on the way to school, or the old guy with the three-legged dog, and he'll do the same path every day. So you sort of imagine the lives of these people. So that's a constant kind of theater. There are also encounters that one has that are even more anonymous, where you only see an individual once, right? It's a single event, and it's somehow meaningful. And so I'll read you a little bit about that, and then we can talk about some of the specifics of the case. Let's see if I can find this. Yeah, again, a couple of pages here. It turns out the less I know about a person, the better. This is proved time and again by life in my building. In Paris, where I've had the same apartment for 20 years, I know only a handful of residents, and my ignorance about the others fuels my imagination. Who exactly is that man who enters the door 12 inches from mine every evening, and does he really have a wife, or is that just him holding up both sides of the conversation? What kind of doctor is it who lives on the ground floor, and why have I only ever seen her twice? Even Monsieur and Madame Estevez, who live in the tiny concierge apartment, are an enigma, no matter how often I speak with them. Compare that to Minnesota, where I spend the other half of my life in a condo building not unlike my Parisian lodgings. People there are unfailingly friendly, well, or at least chatty. By the time I finished moving in, I'd met every person in the building and could tell you how long they'd lived there, what they did in life, which way they voted, and what their dog's name was. Just like that, the mystery was gone. In short, not knowing people somehow improves them, vesting them with special interest. It's the in-flight movie principle, according to which the best film on any airplane is, by definition, the one playing mutely on my neighbor's screen. There, actors gesture, they scowl, they give cutting looks, their mouths open and close, providing me with all I need to recompose the story. In one, a man and woman argue mutely in a suburban living room, and what I sense is a lifetime of heartache and the yearnings of the human soul. On another screen, three men in fatigues mouth their fears before drawing straws in a battlefield trench. In a third, a girl in a high school hallway shrinks under a volley of put-downs, but then finds a flower in her locker. The silence is eloquent. During a transatlantic flight, I can take in several such films, sometimes visible between shoulders in the next row up. And by the time I'm done with them, they are all Oscar material. Occasionally, I've decided the movie was so good that it warrants a second viewing. But when I stream it on Netflix a week later, the audio blaring, something is lost. It plods. There's none of the panache I experienced in the fuselage of the Airbus. Alas, I understand too much. So there is this thing that happens, right, in Paris where you're noticing somebody across the room, you're in a restaurant, you see some sort of interaction, and you sort of build this story around. It's all fodder for the imagination. In this particular chapter, I'm talking about an encounter with a young woman that I help on the metro. She's got a particular problem that needs solving, and of course I'll never ever see her again. But it's this like strangely intimate moment that lasts 3 minutes. That sort of thing, and yet is somehow meaningful. I do think that there are places in Paris that are like especially propitious and favorable for this kind of encounter, and the metro is one of them, right? The metro operates according to a different logic than the surface. When you're underground, everything changes. First of all, people are bound together, which they're not up on top, right? Everybody's their own self, but everybody shares like a common desire. They all want to be somewhere else, right? That's one of the things that draws them together. But there's also this other kind of rule that people abide by when they're in the metro, which is, I don't know, a certain kind of generosity, a certain kind of kindness. One of the things that you typically see, you'll see a woman like with a stroller, a baby in the stroller, comes up and stops at the top of a really long staircase. And she just stands there. And you're thinking, is she going to push it? You know, what's going to happen here? And usually what happens is that out of the throng, somebody appears, usually a man, who will step to the front, will pick up the front of the stroller, she'll pick up the back, and they take it down, 4-point landing, he disappears into the crowd, usually not a word is spoken. And it's just kind of magical. right? That sort of thing. So this is the kind of encounter that I really relish in a city like Paris.
Are you going to read from that particular story?
Well, actually, the part that I just did was, it was not telling about the encounter with her. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I can pull something out. Let's see where we get to.
Okay.
We can see how much time we got left at the end.
I just want you to read both books, okay?
Right, okay, right. So we'll squeeze something in. So with this notion of trying to write a book that is not just about Paris, but where the reading of the book is similar to the experience of Paris, one of the things that I try to do is build in the way in which the city surprises me in various ways. And so I'll talk about that notion a little bit, but first I'm going to read a section for you. And this one is, don't get too scared, it's a whole chapter, but it's a very short one. It's 3 pages. It's called A Thing I Saw, Epiphany. While trudging home with groceries, cutting through an empty side street toward the Rue Bobillot, I asked myself what I should do in my life. It was one of those gray days in the capital when you feel a lid has been clamped over the top of the city, leaving you to stew. What nagged at me was the futility of it all. When I was younger, I kicked the can of meaningfulness down the road, figuring it was all going to make sense later. And every time I caught up with the can, I'd just give it another whack. But at this point, verging on retirement, my family unmoored, and still no cat in my life, I found it unnerving to see that empty road still stretching out in front of me. Wasn't it supposed to lead somewhere, eventually, leaving me with the sense that I'd arrived? Or should I be trying a different direction? I'd made it halfway down the street when I looked up and saw the man floating in front of a high brick wall. Dressed all in blue, the guy was sinking quickly through the air, though not as fast as gravity would ordinarily demand, and he didn't tumble or thrash the way I would have if I were falling from the sky. Young and slender, with a bit of beard, he stood erect during the descent with one hand calmly raised. He was still about 40 feet up when I realized that the wall behind him was the backside of the perennially crumbling local church. That's when the penny dropped. That pose, this place, a descent. It was the second coming. Probably at Sunday school or in sermons, they prepare people for this sort of thing, but as a lifelong miscreant, I was caught off guard. What are you supposed to do in this situation? Avert your gaze? Or get out your phone and snap a selfie? At first, I was surprised he'd choose this street, barely more than an alley, really, for his return. The other side of the church would have been better, where he could descend onto the front steps before a cheering and awestruck crowd, or at least in front of the guys who usually recline on those steps while sipping on cans of beer. Or how about right in the center of town, where there's a honking big cathedral that's pretty much designed for stuff like this? But upon reflection, it seemed right he'd choose a humble neighborhood like mine, with practically no one to witness him. The hard hat struck me as excessively cautious, though I guess he hadn't had a lot of practice. By my calculation, this was just his second time. 20 feet away, he touched down on the asphalt, arms splayed for balance, bending to absorb the impact, since even the Godhead is at risk of knee trouble later in life. Then I saw the harness and my new faith flickered. He unbuckled himself from the cable. On the ground before him lay a few hammers in different sizes. He picked up a silver lunchbox. Turns out the guy was one of those acrobats the construction crews call a cordiste, a fellow who swings from the rooftops to inspect the hard-to-reach nooks, rappelling down the walls. They were doing repairs on the church. And while this savior of masonry dug into a sandwich, I resumed the trek home, a new spring in my step. You go through the years hoping to unwrap the gift of life to find out what's inside. But maybe it's an empty box. The surprise is simply that there is no surprise. And while that isn't much, it's better than no surprise at all. So this notion of surprise is really, for me, what lies at the heart of the Parisian experience. And it is partly by design, the way that the city is designed, the way that it was redesigned in the 19th century, the sort of Haussmannian redesign of the city, where you cut through these big, broad boulevards, you go down this beautiful street, you turn to the left, and suddenly, wow, they plopped an opera house down here. You turn to the right, oh, there's a Renaissance fountain. Part of the surprise comes from the density of the city. So Paris is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. It's denser than New York, than London, than Shanghai. It's a lot of people pressed into a very small space. You have lots of opportunities for novelty. So that plays a really big role. Surprise is really kind of the key for me. And there's an allegory, in a sense, of this notion of surprise that you can see in a piece of statuary at the Musée d'Orsay. If you go to the Musée d'Orsay, in the center, there's the big sort of sculpture gallery. And if you go along on the left-hand side, a couple of steps up, there's a statue of a beautiful woman. She's got her hand to her chin, and she's got this very beguiling look, kind of coy, again, very attractive. And you sort of stand there admiring it. And as you start to turn to look at the rest of the statue, you see that there's something a little bit off in the face, a kind of a seam. And as you go a little bit further around, you see that that's actually not her face at all. What she's holding is a mask. And that her head is not pressed up against the mask. It is tipped back and away, and she is wailing with some sort of lament. And this is, for me, a kind of allegory of how the city of Paris works. Not that it's all a wailing lament, but that there is this, again, bright, shiny surface that we all find so beguiling. But then if we are able to step a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, then all of a sudden it pops and we have that opportunity for surprise. Some of that comes up in the individual chapters, right? So each chapter has a bit of surprise built into it, which again I think is a little bit like the experience of living in Paris. Also in the book as a whole, and I will skip a couple of details because I know that Adrian wants me to read something from the other book, but I'll just mention that in the last section of the book, which is called The Beginning, I embark upon a bizarre and humbling and humiliating adventure, which is the adventure of dating. Again, at a relatively advanced age, as a senior, going onto dating apps and dating both in France and in the US. So happy to share these experiences. Not happy, but willing to share these experiences. So that too leads to a certain number of surprises, not the least of which is the last chapter, which is somewhat different and somewhat more uplifting, but I will not tell you much more about that because I want that one to be a surprise. So let me just pause there, and because you want me to read something from the other book.
I do.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, I think I can find this. Yeah. So I'm going to read a very short piece. It's like 4 pages called City of Lightbulbs. Well, how about that? Surprise is the highest form of pleasure. I don't know who wrote that, but I was like, that works out well. Surprise is the highest form of pleasure, and it's easier to find than people think. You don't have to invest your 401k in Powerball numbers to enjoy the fruits of unpredictability or even travel by Amtrak. No, it turns out you can simply move to Paris, where the ordinary so often leads to adventure. It went like this. Shortly before Anne returned from the States, I finished painting the walls and pushing the furniture back into place. During my final check, I discovered the bedroom lamp had burnt out. This led me to hoof it to the local supermarket, which stocks bulbs of various shapes and sizes. Only after I returned home with my trophy did I realize my error. In France, the base of a bulb is called a culot, a word derived from cul, which translates as ass. Although ungentlemanly in some contexts, cul raises no eyebrows in others. In polite company, you can refer to the bottom of a bottle as a cul de bouteille, or to a dead-end street as a cul-de-sac. You can even mention that a woman has a bouche en cul de poule, and even though you've just said her mouth resembles a chicken's anus, it's somehow a compliment. Culot is similarly inoffensive. The hint at anatomy lies, or perhaps sits, dormant. Your standard light bulb in France is available in 2 different asses. The threaded type, so common in the US, and the unthreaded model, where 2 pins stick out like the bolts on Frankenstein's neck. At the store, I'd mistakenly purchased the Frankenstein-type ass, whereas my lamp required the screw-type variety. Back home, the solution would be straightforward. You would exchange the thing. After all, in the US of A, the customer is always king. In France, though, it's best to remember how royals occasionally wind up with their head in a basket. You should expect a little roughing up. At the store's service counter, I found a middle-aged man with hooded eyes. He was trying to sleep while standing up. "I'd like to exchange this bulb," I announced. He struggled to focus. "What's the matter with it?" "It's the wrong ass." I pointed to the Frankenstein pins. "I need the screw type." There was a long silence. "You can't exchange it here," he said. "You'll need to do it at the register." He seemed rather pleased with himself. Nothing if not obedient, I navigated through the aisles, pausing to pick up the screw-ass bulb I needed. Soon I had joined the line at the checkout. Because the register I'd selected gives right-of-way to pregnant women and invalids, both of whom are abundant in my neighborhood, I had time to reflect. In the States, returning merchandise is not just easy, it is a birthright. Exchanging a purchased article for a different color or size is pretty much expected. Since you can always trade things in later, Americans don't even try to get it right the first time. Usually, you can choose to swap your goods for a different product altogether, or even reverse the transaction, backing out as boldly as you might, say, from the Paris Accords or NATO. How foresightful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good job.
If there are limits to this principle, I have not encountered them. My mother recently returned a set of dishes despite having used them for 5 years. Even though she possessed no sales slip or original packaging and the store could find no record of the sale, they issued her a full refund.
Oh my God.
Only later did she happen upon the missing receipt. Turns out she'd purchased the stuff elsewhere. So it goes. Back at the grocery store, it was my turn at the register. The cashier was a large woman shaped much like a pyramid and nearly as expressionless. I produced the bulb along with its receipt. "What's that?" she said. "I need to exchange it. It has the wrong ass." I held up the screw-ass version I wished to replace it with. She sat motionless. People behind me were getting antsy. At any moment, a pregnant invalid might show up and butt in. "You can't do that here," she said finally. "You'll have to take it to the service counter." As a kid, I found myself in more games of keep-away than I care to admit, so I saw how this would unfold. They'd send me back and forth until I ran home in tears. "I have already been to the service counter," I declared. "They sent me to you." The pyramid gritted her teeth. Behind her darkening brow, steam collected. "Saeed," she bellowed, "Saeed." The man with hooded eyes lumbered forward, and a discussion ensued. 2 other cashiers joined the fun. What to do? Was such an exchange allowed? How was it to be handled? Who was authorized to reverse a charge? None of the employees had ever done it before. I traveled from register to register as various cashiers took a run at this feat, the way Olympic hopefuls try again and again to land a triple axel. Eventually, a manager was found. He straightened his cuffs, and after 20 minutes of negotiation, a swap was arranged between 2 bulbs of equal wattage and value. On my way home, I pondered my lesson. In the States, if you don't like one light bulb, you trade it in for another, as easily as if it were a car, a spouse, or a pair of socks. In France, no matter what bed you've made for yourself, they expect you to lie in it. Whether you're talking education, careers, friends, or home accessories, there are few takebacks. Today's small adventure had revealed the cornerstone of life in France, its base, its very cul. By then I had returned, and I screwed my trophy into the lamp. With a flourish of satisfaction, I flicked the switch. Twice. 3 times. A brief inspection revealed the cause of all my ills. I'd left the cord unplugged after moving the furniture. I didn't need that bulb after all. I considered returning it.
Oh, God. Oh,
So maybe
God.
this is a good time to pause and see what sorts of questions, comments, complaints, wails, laments people might have. Yeah.
Have you done the books in audio version yet?
Yes. Yeah, they're both available in audio.
Oh,
Yeah.
then see, I'm going to do them again. Great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about leaving that Amazon comment. You're a nice guy.
I agree with you.
Scott, did you say a third book is in the works?
So, I mean, I've got another project that I'm just finishing now. I've got a novel that is coming out, and then I've got this other film project that you know a little bit about. But then, yeah, stories are accumulating for another collection.
Excellent.
Yeah.
There's clearly enough to write about.
It's the gift that keeps on giving, right? That's a great thing about Paris.
You're such an observer of the French condition, if you will. I was just wondering how you memorialize these as they happen. Do you take notes when you get home? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. I try to. I wish I were better about it. So I wish I could be one of these very disciplined journaling types, which I am not. But I do usually have like a little moleskin notebook, and if something really important comes up, I note it down there. Sometimes at the end of the day. Sometimes I don't recognize it right away, right? So it's like only a couple of days later that I think, you know, actually that was kind of interesting. I didn't. So then I try to capture it as best I can. Of course, this is not, you probably have gathered, journalistic prose. So there are a few little liberties taken. I can't verify the accuracy of the dialogue, for example. I have not committed. I don't always have like the mic out. The way that I should do that. I should just like walk around and when I'm in Paris, say, you know, please speak into the lapel or something. But I do try to note things down as best I can, and I'm getting better about that. Yeah.
The statue that you saw at the D'Orsay with
Yeah.
the mask, I wonder if maybe she had just been to the bank trying to open an account.
Can you repeat what she said, because she's not mic'd up.
Right.
And we really need the audience to hear that.
So I was giving that description of this statue, which is by Ernest Christophe, and it's called The Human Comedy, at the Orsay Museum. And the question was, is it possible that the wailing figure has that particular expression because she had just attempted to open an account at the bank? Seems entirely likely. Yeah.
Actually, I need to remind you to try to repeat the question, because they won't be heard on the recording. Thank you.
I will do my darndest. Yeah.
That means we got to do the thing all over.
Yeah. Let me start from the beginning. Yeah. Right.
Oh, goodness. No questions? I can't believe it.
Yeah.
what did you teach at Carleton? Were you a professor of journalism?
Good question. No, so actually, professor of French literature and creative writing. So, and I'm just wrapping up that part of my career now. So, yeah, and for many years I was leading a program, a study abroad program here in Paris, which is one of the things that allowed me to, allowed me to. Oh, and I was supposed to repeat that question. Right?
No, but the answer's obvious.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, the rules of this game are like so perplexing to me. But yeah. Marcia, did you have?
Yeah, I was wondering, of all the things that you've experienced in Paris,
Oh my God. Yeah.
can you name one that you found the most confounding?
So the question is, of all the experiences I've had in Paris, could I name one that is the most confounding? So I have a really hard time choosing like the top one of anything. What is my favorite book? What is my favorite film? But I have like this pantheon. Right? I got the collection of the top ones. And, you know, it depends on what you mean by confounding.
The turd's pretty good.
Yeah. But there are like what I really enjoy is getting into situations that most people don't get themselves into, and then get myself out of that situation somehow, whether or not other people succeed in doing that or not. I would say in French like moi, I've got a chapter that is dedicated to the Catacombs. And I don't mean the part at Denfert Rochereau that the public can visit, but the Catacombs. So the city is a Swiss cheese, right? And like, don't stomp your feet. If we all stomp our feet at the same time, we're going to go down, because like 70 feet down there are tunnels underground. And on the left bank, these are the old limestone quarries. So what happened is that as Paris was being constructed, stone was mined. It was quarried, but quarried underground, and it was extracted to build things like Notre Dame and the Hôtel Dieu and some of these older buildings in the center of Paris. They would extract these, and that means that Paris is really kind of an upside-down cake. The stone from underneath has been brought up to the surface, but that left a problem underground, which is that it's full of holes, and there are places where it has collapsed. But on the left bank, there are 270 kilometers of underground passageways that are supposedly closed to the public, but there is a secret society of the cataphiles, the cataphiles, who like to go spelunking. And so I've had the opportunity to go spelunking for many long excursions in the catacombs. And unlike some people, managed to resurface. There's
Alive.
Alive. So there is a famous story of somebody who went down into the catacombs and his light went out, and he was found, but it was, I think, 7 years later. And right, so you don't want that to happen too often. So there are things like that. But I mean, there's so many confounding experiences. A lot of them have to do with bureaucracy. I mean, there's a reason that word is French, right? And I say that I think that dealing with the bureaucracy is sort of like a national sport in France, and so you like figure out your angles and the kinds of plays and bluffs that you have, and you feel really, really good when you pull it off. Really miserable when you don't. But yeah, so I sort of enjoy those. I mean, basically, I like it when things go wrong. And in most of these chapters, what happens is something goes wrong. And it's like, well, that's interesting. I wonder how this is going to be solved. And more or less, it does get solved. So.
We call it the misadventure.
Yes, that's right. Misadventure. Exactly.
At least it's not boring.
It's almost never boring,
Never
right?
boring.
It might be totally miserable.
Never boring.
I mean, in the first book, I tell the story of being hauled into a police station for what was thought to be a visa infraction. It was all worked out. I'm still alive and well. But I mean, that too is like, oh, this is. At the same time, you're thinking, this is not going to end well, and you're thinking, this is material. Yeah.
You talk about dating in Minnesota and dating here in France.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, it's equally terrifying, I think, in both places. What is the difference? What is the difference? So one of the big differences is that if you're dating, so this is like this crazy world of online dating, which is like the stupidest thing imaginable, except that it's better than what we used to do. Right? Because, I mean, it used to be that you would be introduced to somebody, you would just like to meet somebody, you know nothing about them, and then you'd like have a few dates and you realize, oh, we're not at all alike. And here you at least know right away, definitely not. Right? 17 dogs, nope. You draw the line whichever way you want to. So there is that. But when you're dating in the US and somebody finds out, oh, you know, professor of French, and oh, you spend part of the year in Paris and everything. It's like, oh, so then it's the bright, shiny object problem of Paris. And when you're dating in Paris, and if the people are in the Paris region, then it's like, oh, Paris, that's such a grind getting into the city, and so that's one of the big differences.
So you were geographically undesirable because you were in Paris?
Well,
For the
geographically
Parisians.
less desirable for certain, unless they happen to live right in the city. Yeah,
Okay, fair
right. Yeah, the anti-Paris bias.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Once you do fully retire, would you consider living in Paris full time?
Yeah, so the question is, once I fully retire, would I consider living here full time? And I have spent so much of my life going back and forth that it's hard for me to conceive of not doing that. I can imagine the balance shifting. I still have my 94-year-old mother that I'm like helping in various ways. So probably I'm not jumping ship anytime soon. But I don't know. I like having a foot in each culture. It's really been sort of my way of living. Although I realize
You might like it less as time goes on.
that thought has also crossed my mind.
There's an awful lot of jumping ship going on.
Yeah, right. But I like having the flexibility, right, to be able to decide, and especially now to determine my own schedule, so that and actually to be here without having the tremendous responsibilities of running a program and everything. It's a nice change.
Scott, do you have a carte de séjour or a carte de résident?
So I vary. So it's been a long time since I've actually had a carte de séjour, and so what I usually have is a long stay visa. And now I'm trying to determine if I'm going to be
The 1 year. You have the 1 year visa.
The 1 to 2 year, yeah. So the last time I had it, I think it was 15 months. And now we're trying to decide exactly what we want to do. Yeah. Don't know the answer to that question.
Yet.
Yeah.
First time you came to France, and Paris in particular, why did you pick the 13th as opposed to some other location?
Yeah, so the question is, when I first came to Paris, why choose the 13th rather than somewhere else? And slightly long-winded answer, I'll try to shorten up, is that when I first came to Paris, I mostly wanted to leave Paris as quickly as I could. So I was forced into French at an early age, and when I was a kid, we lived in London for a while, and that's where everybody was learning French because it was the language of the enemy and you had to learn it. And then we had like family trips and school trips, and Paris was dirty, and I don't know, I just wasn't into it at all. But I did get that very early exposure. And then later on, I started thinking that French was actually kind of cool and pursued it. But my main interest, it turned out that what I didn't like was Paris. And what I didn't really like about Paris was the glitzy, shiny object part of it, which is what I had seen first, right? So most of the time that I spent in France, I was in the provinces. Spent quite a bit of time in the southwest, especially. And then because of the way that everything works in France, everything gets sucked into Paris eventually. So friends were coming to Paris, and my work eventually brought me to Paris. And so begrudgingly, I made my way here. And for a long time, I was renting in various places, but mostly in the 5th Arrondissement, which if you know your Arrondissement, that's just north of the 13th. And so what happened is that when we decided we were going to buy, we thought, well, obviously we're going to buy in the 5th. But it turns out that it's a little pricey. And so we started like moving a little further away, and it was sort of like NASA's Mariner probe, just kind of continuing to go. And we finally found ourselves in this area that I knew nothing about, and ended up then in the 13th because it was accessible. And then learned after the fact that I was delighted to be there. It's just a place, again, doesn't have a lot of tourist activity, but it is rich with activities of, sort of, I don't know, just life in general.
You're in the Butte aux Cailles, right?
The Butte aux Cailles, but I mean the Butte aux Cailles is this little tiny, it's like 3 or 4
Yeah,
blocks.
but it's not bad.
It's not bad. That's just a
No,
couple
it's
blocks
pretty
for me.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's like the little sort of hot spot that we have. But otherwise, I mean, it's just like, it's great markets, and it's, like movie theaters and a couple of theaters and, lots of things to do. So it's a really wonderful place to be.
Even though it has no monument in it.
It does have little monuments, right? It's got these little things that nobody goes to. It's like, it's where the first landing of a hot air balloon was in Paris.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
No, it is. Yeah, it's very famous for that.
Very famous.
Very
yes.
famous for that.
The factory Le Gobelin.
The Gobelin,
Gobelin,
right? Yeah.
right.
So that's, I mean,
Isn't that on the map?
it is not. How many people here have been to the Gobelin? Right?
You know, I have never
2,
been.
maybe 3. Right. Not a giant
Right.
destination, but it is there. Yeah. So there are some things.
I keep threatening to go and have never done that. 30 years.
Right.
They keep that same small museum actually keeps a lot of the furniture from the different chateaus and the presidential palaces that have changed hands. So
Yeah.
they restore a lot of, do restoration and conservation of a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, there you
So-
go.
There you
And
go.
right, no, I mean it's definitely worth a visit, and the whole history of tapestries and yeah,
But it is true, the price in the 13th is decidedly different than the 5th. All you have to do is cross the street.
that's right. Yeah.
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 So,
Ah. No other questions?
well,
you.
golly, thank you.
Thank you. Oh my God. Okay, so now you see why you have to get the book, because you're going to just continue to laugh. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Scott. You're here, you're going to sign books.
Sure, happy to.
Everybody's welcome to hang out as long as you like. Just don't forget to pay before you leave. Downstairs on the left, okay? And have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.